But first, for our top story this morning, we've got Dr. Sal Mercogliano joining us to give us an update on what's going on the oceans. Of course, our resident ocean shipping expert. Sal, thank you for being here. The crises seem to keep on growing. So I'm going to let you decide, where do we start? Do we start in the Red Sea? Do we start in the Panama Canal? Dealer's choice.
I'd probably start with the Red Sea. That's where we're seeing the latest. Thanks for having me again on, Kaylee. It's good to see you. Yeah, the Red Sea has seen an escalation. Yesterday, we saw a series of attacks against two U.S. flag vessels of Maersk Line's subsidiary line in the United States, Maersk Lines Limited. Obviously, the Houthi are still present. They're still shooting. And this really indicates that right now, this passage through the Red Sea is being contested by them. Again, what that translates to specifically is about 30% of the vessels that normally sail through this area have been diverted. That represents over 50% of the tonnage. And we're talking about large value vessels. We're talking about, obviously, container ships. We're talking now about product tankers, gasoline, diesel. And we're getting into other energy areas, LNG and LPG. So all of this is starting to manifest itself. We're seeing delays in production facilities in Europe. We've already seen several main manufacturing plants announce that they're going to be delays because they're waiting for cargo to arrive. And we can expect to see that slip over into the United States starting at the end of this month into February. Obviously, with the Chinese New Year looming on the horizon, this is usually a peak time where a lot of cargo is being moved before you have that week holiday in Asia. But what we're going to see right now is that containers are not being returned soon enough. So this is going to spill out into the end of February into March. And again, unlike the supply chain crisis we saw a few years ago, where that was an issue of demand, we said we had extremely high demand. This is really more of an issue of capacity, of being able to fill out the capacity and stretch it over those long distances.
So, Sal, we've obviously seen some steps of intervention from some of our militaries across the world. The United Kingdom, as well as the United States, have put people in place. Has that been effective at all in deterring any of these attacks, or are the rebel activities just, frankly, too much to be deterred from the military presence?
Yeah, the military has been able to diminish the number of attacks that have happened. However, what we've seen is they're not able to eliminate them. And the problem here is convincing insurance companies that it is safe enough to sail through the area. We just saw a bulk carrier come into the Suez shipyard with a missile hole in its top hatch and out the port side of the vessel. And that's going to tell insurance companies that it's not safe to sail through. Remember, they're looking at issues, even though we haven't seen severe damage, we haven't seen any crews injured or killed, fortunately. The fear here is that one of these hits could lead to the catastrophic loss of a vessel. If you go back to 2013, when MOL Comfort, a 8,000 box container ship, was lost due to a fire and a breakup of the vessel, the insurance paid out $250 million on that. Now we're talking about ships twice that size, 3 times that size. And so it's really cost prohibitive for the insurance companies to write a policy that's going to allow you to sail your vessel through. And while the U.S. Navy, the British Navy, the French, the Italians, and all these other forces are doing yeoman work in trying to knock down these missiles and prevent their launches, the Houthi are doing this because of the underlying issue, which is the war in Israel and Gaza. And as long as they're able to still launch missiles and hit vessels, which is what we just saw the other day, a very close hit on a ship called the Maersk Detroit, they're going to keep routing their ships around Africa.
So as we know, the motive behind this is, as you mentioned, very much tied to that conflict between Israel and Palestine. And is that something that we are starting to see any progress on as far as just general talks go? Is there kind of that relative, I guess, link between talks going on with Israel-Palestine and them saying, hey, lay off of what's going on in the Red Sea?
Yeah, I mean, we keep hearing about potential truce talks and about the release of hostages and prisoners, but unfortunately they keep breaking down. And, you know, the root cause that ends this all is peace in the Middle East, and that's been elusive since 1948. And so what the Houthi are doing is very much ideological. It's why it's very tough to try to convince them. We saw some efforts. Prime Minister Sunak of Great Britain really wanted to advocate a diplomatic solution to this. I think he wanted to open up a dialogue with Iran, and and try to do it. But Iran then launched a series of attacks against U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria, and they also attacked Pakistan. And the fear here is you start seeing this gradual escalation where these conflicts start merging together. I think what the U.S. and the allies need to do is really start working with the insurance companies, with the shipping companies, and see what they can do to perhaps underwrite the war risk insurance and try to get ships going back through this area. If they can get normal traffic flowing again through the area, that kind of diminishes the impact the Houthi are having. Because, like as I said, they've been able to hit ships, but they have not been able to knock any ships out or kill or wound any of the crew members. And so the big overall issue we're getting here to is perception. Right now, the perceived nature is so dangerous that we're going to see those extended sea lines going around Africa. And again, that's a safe bet. And shipping lines are jumping on that because of the increased profit and revenue they can generate from a 7 to 14 day longer voyage.
So let's move from one side of the world to the other and zoom in a little bit on the continuing situation with the Panama Canal. We got some news that between November to December, the rate of decline in transits actually dropped. But we're looking at more restrictions potentially going into place by the end of this month as we enter the true dry season in Panama. What can you tell us right now about what's happening there?
Yeah, that's the really sad part is we're at the lowest level the lake has been, and that's usually at the peak of the dry season, and we're just coming into the 5 months right now of the dry season. So you're at about 2/3 capacity, but the big issue is in that Neo-Panamax lane. It is that big lane that allows the large 15,000, 16,000 box ships to come through. So we're seeing carriers adjust a bit. So one of the things we're seeing, Maersk announced this last week, that they'll be coming in on the Pacific side of the canal, offloading some of their boxes and then railing them across and picking them up on the other side. That will keep the level of the ships up. The other thing we're seeing is the shipping operators are really developing a new process. So when those ships come through the Panama Canal and hit the U.S. East and Gulf Coast, they're going to return back through eastward, go around Africa to Asia. And what this does is it frees up a passage through the Suez Canal for fully loaded ships to come through. So that's going to extend out voyages. What we're seeing right now is charter hire for container ships is going up through the roof again because you're going to need more ships on it. This is at the same time we're seeing new vessels come online. So we'll see older vessels remain in service a bit longer. But this also has issues with emission standards. Ships going into Europe, for example, have to pay a tax on their carbon emission. And if you're sailing around Africa, if you're sailing around the world, that's going to increase the amount of carbon emission you're having. So there's a lot of unforeseen expenses that are going to start cropping in here, and we're going to start seeing them in the freight rates as they go forward. Are we going to see that huge bulge that we saw in the supply chain crisis of 2020 and 2021? Probably not as high, but we're definitely going to see it plateau off here eventually once we get into a system that we can operate at a kind of perceived level. We're already seeing those big spikes, those $10,000 freight rate box rates come back down again. So I think we're going to get into a stabilization somewhere around February. But again, the minute the Houthi reopen up the Suez, or if we start getting water into the Panama, then we got to reshuffle everything. And there's going to be a bit of distortion on the backside of this.
So I asked this of John Kingston yesterday when we were talking about diesel prices and petroleum exports specifically from the U.S. Is that something that we're seeing continue to be affected by the crisis in Panama, as well as those exports of LNG coming out of, say, Texas, for example?
Yeah, energy is going to be the big one to watch right now because while we have a plethora of container ships, we don't have a plethora of tankers, especially clean product tankers. So one of the things we're seeing is while, for example, Russian oil on the dark fleet is going through the Suez and able to sail past the Red Sea, the clean product tankers that are having that diesel fuel refined in the Middle East, in India and China are going the long route around. And if Europe starts seeing a spike in prices, if they start seeing a demand for diesel that can't be satisfied because, again, there's a finite fleet of these product tankers. What we may start seeing is, once again, diesel fuel being pulled out of the New York, New Jersey area and shipped over to Europe because of the price differential. And that could lead to shortages of diesel fuel within the United States, particularly up in that New England area. And so energy is really going to be a big fix here in how we see it. And if we see a decrease in the number of routes through the Panama Canal, then some of the refined product that goes between the two coasts of the United States on Jones Act tankers may become more cost prohibitive. The U.S. does not have an advantage in the Panama Canal anymore of routing its U.S. flagships through there back when we controlled the canal. so that we have to get on the line and wait to get through. So we could see some spikes in some energy as it goes forward.
That supply chain and shipping is never, ever boring. Sal, thank you for joining us this morning. And of course, we can catch your show on YouTube. Give him a follow on Twitter as well if you haven't done that yet.
Kaylee, it's always great to be with you guys. Appreciate it.